Hi, everybody. Welcome to Detention. We are really excited to be joined here today by Coach Ryan Bolton. If you are just meeting Ryan, he's the owner and founder of Bolton Endurance Sports Training. He is also the founder and head coach of the Harambe Project based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. After a college running career that included All-American and academic All-American honors, Ryan entered the sport of professional triathlon with the goal of competing in the Olympic Games, a goal in which he was successful. In 2000, Ryan represented the United States in the inaugural Olympic triathlon and went on to compete at the top level of long course triathlon racing, culminating with a win at Ironman Lake Placid in 2002.
After racing, Bolton enrolled in graduate school and received a Master of Science in Human Nutrition with an emphasis on stress metabolism in 2006. Currently, Bolton coaches professional and amateur runners and triathletes, including Waddy Inc. athletes Heather Jackson and Sam Long, who once referred to Ryan as his triathlon grandfather. He also coaches Ben Hoffman and Kyle Buckingham, among many other professional athletes. And in 2009, he formed the Harambe Project, a group of elite distance runners, including the 2015 Boston Marathon champion Caroline Rotich. Ryan Bolton, welcome to Detention.
I have a question, and this is just to clarify. Why is this called Detention? Am I in trouble? What's going on here?
You're not in trouble, but so we call it Detention because this little side project of ours is called the Endurance School, and all of our other sessions are like workouts and things where ostensibly we are learning things, and then this is where we Molly and I get together and think about what we've done, but we ask people who actually know what they're doing to come to Detention and help us out.
Well, if you knew me in elementary school or in junior high or in high school or in college, detention was like, it was a pretty common place for me to be hanging out. So
we're so happy
I feel maybe right at home.
You're in the right place, Ryan. That is our
and
traditional.
It was probably for the same reasons that most triathletes were in detention. I think it was like for running down hallways and causing mischief and chaos, because I had way too much energy.
And talking too much, in my case. I talked too much, and I talked back too much.
That is our first question that we ask everybody is this your first time in detention? Which apparently it isn't. So now we have to ask you, what are some of the reasons, other than running down halls, that you spent time in detention?
They probably usually had to do with girls, and a lot of good reasons to be in detention. But honestly, the first time that we had detention lunch in junior high, and I when you go to a school and there's hallways that are like 100 meters long with no people in them, like, and you're a high energy kid, it is kind of hard. And honestly, I swear I got in trouble so many times for running down hallways and everything. And I remember it was the first time that my parents, normally your parents are mad at you for doing stuff that gets you thrown in detention. And I remember getting thrown in detention lunch, because that's what they did. So you had to sit like in this room and not say anything, and it was horrible. And my mom was like, I don't think they understand you. And I don't know why you're getting in trouble for running in school if you're not causing harm to anyone, because she was like, you have to get your energy out of you. And I think she just she understood because living at home with me and all that energy. But yeah, it seems like detention was a commonplace. So yeah.
That you'll be surprised, actually. Most of our guests are like, I've never been to detention before.
Yeah, triathletes.
Mm-hmm. Almost all of our coaches have been to detention before.
Before we get to our second question, that kind of leads to another place, though, because when we talked last winter, you kind of told the story of how you ended up in endurance sports in the first place, which I think had something to do with your sister's swim practice. Could you tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, that's true. It's along exactly these same lines. I think, the way that I was told, I think I was like 5 years old, and my sister must have been 7 or 8. She's 3 years older than me, and she was at swim practice, and my mom would bring me to swim practice as my sister was at swim practice, and I was like running around the deck and getting into trouble and causing mischief And my mom kind of, light bulb went off above her head, and she was like, why am I dealing with this craziness? And so she put me in a Speedo and threw me in the water, and the rest is history. Yeah.
So it's the best way to deal with things in my experience.
No, totally. Yeah.
My mom did
then
the
swimming
same.
wasn't quite enough. So then I got running, and then running wasn't quite enough. So then I started cycling, and then by 3 sports, that sort of brought me down to a maybe sort of normal level.
Just like a very subdued.
Right.
So this is why it's simple for you to work with Sam Long. You're basically coaching a version of you from
right. Exactly. Yeah. Sam's like the Energizer Bunny. Like, he just keeps on going and going and going and going. Yeah. Yeah. He's got an ever never-ending amount of energy, and I guess maybe at 25 years old, that's like how a lot of us are or were. But yeah, that guy. Yeah, and he always wants more, of course.
I can see it. So you are basically the last person that we've spoken to in person. I don't know if everybody who's watching tonight knows this, but we last spoke to Ryan in Tucson at the Hit Squad camp there, and after that, like everything has changed. So business as usual this year. What's been going on? How have you been doing?
Yeah, for me, it's sort of business as usual. So Tucson. I live in Santa Fe, New Mexico, but in every winter we get a house in Tucson. We rent a house in Tucson. Ben Hoffman has a place there. Heather Jackson has a place there. But my other pros, we get a house, and everyone just kind of like congregates and stays in that house, and for a few months during this time. And we're doing the same thing this year, and which works really well. And Tucson's actually going pretty well. We have a couple good swim programs there. The group rides are happening a bit more conservatively than normal. And, smaller groups, people are being, smarter in that way. In some ways it's business as usual. I would say the difference this year, or a big difference, especially with a lot of the pros that I'm working with, but even age group athletes, is last year when COVID started hitting, I sat down with all the different pros and said, hey, how are we going to handle this? And each of them it was kind of a different individual plan with each of them, depending upon, what point they were in their careers, what their motivation levels were, what they wanted to accomplish in the year and everything. I would say the difference this year, and it varied widely. And whereas this year, I would say everyone's like, okay, I'm okay if races get canceled, and I realize that they may get canceled, but like, I'm going for it. I'm diving in. I've got both feet in this year, and I'm hoping that races happen, So, which is kind of fun from a coaching standpoint. It's nicer to be, everyone's engaged in everything. Last year, there was so much, waiting and seeing and all of that type of stuff. And this year, regardless, I think almost everyone's really drilling it right now, hoping that races are going to happen. And I mean, it's so regionally dependent, but races are happening, and it looks like they'll continue to. And if they can continue to safely, then awesome.
So that's been something that we've talked about a lot in previous episodes, but I'm curious about how the folks that you work with have been handling like the constant uncertainty of race schedules. And I know that many of the people you coach, this is their profession and their livelihood. What have you seen be successful in the approach that people have taken to this year?
Right. Well, I think like looking at the pros, and I'll use 3 people as examples, and it's 3 people that you guys mentioned. Well, actually, I'll use 4. And the first, like Caroline Rotich, she's a runner, and running really shut down last year. You can't have events with 40,000 people, side by side the entire way. And so, there's doing staggered starts is difficult. There's been these like small races and everything, but at her point in her career, she's late in her career. I mean, she really just took the year off. Did she stay fit? Of course, she still ran every day and everything, but we really approached it as, foundation, recharge the batteries, and, get ready for when racing does resume. The 3 triathletes that you guys have mentioned, and it's kind of fun to talk about all 3 of them because they all 3 approached it very differently. And, Ben Hoffman, was a relatively new dad. He's very established in his career. You know, he has wonderful sponsors, and you know, he has so many amazing results under his belt and everything. And like, he really, you know, decided like, listen, like, I'm not going to, you know, chase stuff that, you know, isn't potentially going to happen. Like, I'm going to basically plug in and enjoy life, enjoy my wife, enjoy my, you know, new baby, and get ready for when racing does resume. And so, you know, so he really kept it like pretty low key last year and recharged batteries. And, you know, and it really worked. I feel like it worked well for him, because now he's incredibly rejuvenated and incredibly ready to, you know, just drill it. And then talking about HJ, like, you know, she, in a very HJ way, similar to Ben, you know, I mean, she's like, she's further along in her career. She's very established. She has great sponsors. Once again, so many good results under her belt. But she, like, you know, her and Wadi, you know, for the first part of COVID, like, they, you know, they went camping a lot, and they like went on adventures a lot, and they treated training, like, Heather had a little bit of a harder time like shutting off from training, but she maybe made it more fun. You know, she did a lot of gravel riding, and, you know, we did some fun run blocks that were actually really beneficial for her long-term fitness, but it's stuff that we felt like she needed to work on. And now, you know, been working on swimming more with her as we're getting into this season. But once again, her batteries are recharged, and like, I've never seen her like as motivated and invigorated as she is right now. And kind of in contrast to both of those guys is Sam. And Sam and I sat down relatively early, and Sam's young, you know, and the year before he was just starting to break through. You know, he had 2 70.3 wins and an Ironman win, but no one really knew who Sam Long was, you know. I mean, like I said, he's a 23-year-old kid. And so in last year, like, he really took advantage of the year, and we trained hard, and he, you know, got Strava records, and, you know, he chased that type of stuff, and which he loves. And he got like a massive following because of that. And then when races started happening, he was ready, you know, and he dove in, and you know, regardless of the size of the race, he just kind of like went for it, and he took risks because he could, and because he's young. And like, I'm a big believer in that, especially right now. I mean, he has so many lessons to learn, and you know, he has a long career in front of him, but it got him so much more exposure. And I mean, last year at this time, if you asked a lot of people in the triathlon community who's Sam Long, they would have been like, I don't know. And during a year of COVID, because he does have that energy, and he wanted to, like, you know, he really put himself out there and really made major gains in fitness, and also like just major gains in the sport by, you know, doing well and everything. So, you know, and it's funny because he even did Daytona at the end of the year, and Daytona was an afterthought, like, for everything with him. And he still had like an amazing race there. And I think it's just because he just went in with relatively good fitness, and you know, he just and once again, he just took risks and he went for it. And he paid for it, but he still had a pretty good race, you know? So yeah, I always, you know, if he wouldn't have made 42 mistakes in the race, like, he would have been like right up front, it would have been really good. But he's got a lot of time to do that. And I'm glad that, you know, and I'm glad that he's willing to take those risks too. So yeah.
One of the questions that we've been asking everybody, and you kind of gone into this a little bit already, but this past year has been a hard one, but it's also one that's made people innovate. What are some of the ways that you have used this time to come up with new things or new approaches?
Yeah, you know, that's a really great question. I mean, it's been such a great year to work on weaknesses, and with different athletes, and or to work on specific things that you normally don't have an opportunity to work on, you know, because the season's so quick and all that stuff. Plus, I think age groupers and pros alike, like, we oftentimes get kind of like stuck in our ruts of, you know, and you don't address, and I'll use a prime example of what happens in triathlon. You know, you have a cyclist who is afraid to work on their run because they're afraid that they're going to lose, you know, some of their cycling fitness. And this last year, you could kind of take that risk. You could be like, hey, listen, let's lay off the cycling for a while. Let's work on your running for a while, because, you know, you don't have to hold on to your cycling. There's not going to be a race for a really long time and everything. So you could actually work on specific weaknesses. Yeah. And, but Yeah, the other thing that changed, I would say, is just, the travel and people having to make the most of their local environments and taking advantage of, I mean, Zwift and Zwift Racing is such a thing now that I would say what's changed with that is now, like, it's commonplace to work with athletes and be like, hey, I want your high intensity bike ride. We're going to do, this workout on Zwift, or in fact, this race on Zwift on Wednesday or whatever. So I think that landscape has changed a lot, and it's become so much more normal, as well. So, yeah.
I need to hear more about the Zwift racing. That's also been another topic. Like, it's so great for the folks who need something to do. It's also like so much intensity and challenging to kind of schedule around. So
super great question.
Yeah. Tell us more.
I know, it's challenging. Well, and I think, indoor trainer riding, that is a problem. It's December, it's the off season, and you get on Zwift and, some dude from Australia passes you on the bike and you're like, I'm not going to let that guy go. And all of a sudden you're cranking 400 watts for 20 minutes and you're totally slammed. Yeah, exactly. Ego gets in the way. I mean, I get that way. I was on a Peloton recently because I was with a client. They had a Peloton and I was like, I'm going to warm up for, this strength workout. I was actually warming up for a strength workout. And at the end of my 15-minute warm up on the Peloton, I was like, yeah, top 100 on the leaderboard, and I'm totally crashed. But I still got beat by a 58-year-old woman in New Jersey. But anyway, yeah, I think it is, you have to, it's a great place to work on weaknesses at specific times of the year, which I think it's valuable that way, but it can suck people into ignoring, like, laying foundations that they need to lay, and instead just jumping instantly into high intensity. HJ she did the Zwift Racing the last 2 weeks, and we'll do the third race tomorrow. And we had this conversation. She was like, hey, I've been invited to do the Zwift Racing. What do you think? And I was like, well, let's look at the distances and let's talk about that. And how does that fit into your schedule? Because if she's doing a May Ironman, doing a 6 kilometer, time trial on the bike that's, like uphill, which is what the first leg is, I was like, it's not super specific training and everything. But if we incorporate it into the schedule, which is what we've done, we've kind of like moved stuff around and made it work and fit. And it's such a short amount of time that, if it were like Ironman races on Zwift, then it would be a totally different conversation. But it's possible to fit it into the schedule, but I think you do have to police it quite a bit with athletes to make sure that, they don't go overboard with it. Because even, you can hop into Zwift Race, but like I said, even on your casual, ride around, London, on a Tuesday morning, sometimes people get sucked into, some competitiveness for sure.
How can you tell when like a particular workout, like Zwift Racing, is no longer taking an athlete in a helpful direction?
Just by knowing their numbers and looking at the stats, totally. Why was your heart rate pegged at 180 beats per minute, on this aerobic ride today? Yeah, I would say that. And once again, in a sense, though, and I think that's a great question, Chris. Like, in a sense, like, every once in a while, it's totally okay to get, like, competitive on a Zwift ride and, like, kind of let it go. You know what I mean? It's like, it's actually okay. When it starts happening on a, daily basis or even like a weekly basis, when it's not supposed to be, I think that's when it can get, like, unhealthy. The other, like, kind of problem with it is I think athletes sometimes, like, it's January or it's February and they've been doing all base miles, and then they get on Zwift, to do a harder effort and everything. And they're like, geez, my numbers just aren't that good right now. Or I just got destroyed by, so-and-so who never, beats me. And I'm like, and you have to say, well, what phase of training are you in right now? And does it make sense that, of course you're not going to have that sharpness or that high end, and, someone else maybe right now, because that's what they've been focusing on, whatever. But I think with me emphasizing, like, what is the long-term goal here, and what are we trying to accomplish? And these results are good for right now. And, this is why we're doing this right now. And, yeah, if you were to do a Zwift race, 2 weeks before your A race, you'd probably destroy people. So, but the other thing about Zwift is it's a game, you know what I mean? And you have to gamify it, and you have to understand the game. And that's been a learning process for, I mean, age groupers and pros alike, you know what I mean? Like, hey, did you use your aero helmet with my what? How do I use that? How do I use that? So yeah, I mean, you have to know how to play the game. And some people, both pros and age groupers alike are brilliant at playing that game too. I mean, they can push watts, but they're also good at playing the game.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of folks now are, because of Zwift and because of, the very virtual environment that we're living in, are dealing with more information, I think, about themselves and about their competition. I know that you coach some folks who also probably have to tune out some of that noise. Do you have recommendations or anything you tell athletes to help them to focus on their own performance when everybody else's seems to get noisy?
Yeah, no, totally. And, it's the age of social media. And I see this like all around like, I don't know what to call it. And I'm sure like psychologists, like there's some name for this phenomena, but like when you're on Instagram and you look and you see what people are doing and you're like, whoa, all these people are drilling it and hitting these magical times all the time. In reality, maybe they're drilling one workout a week and they're posting that one workout because it looks really good. But when you're on social media and you're seeing like multiple people doing that on a daily basis, then you think that everyone every day is training incredibly hard and going incredibly fast. It's very rare. And I actually appreciate the people who do this, that people post on social media. They're like, went for a run today, supposed to be holding 6-minute miles, but man, I couldn't hold an 8-minute mile. I suck. People don't do that. Went for a run today, supposed to be holding 6-minute miles, held 5-minute miles instead, no problem. You just don't see people. So I think people get this false like perception of how much people are training and how hard people are training. And then they get sucked into that world. And I mean, I hear it from my athletes, a lot of times people will even ask me, whoa, it seems like so-and-so is training a tremendous amount right now. And it's like, yeah, they're not really, Well, you should have seen what they posted on Instagram the other day. I'm like, yeah, that was the biggest week, or the biggest day of, the last month. And of course they posted that on social media today because it's a huge day, and people, and I think people look at that and they're like, wow, they're doing this every day. And it's like, no, So I think, yeah, like kind of coaching people, like I said, it's like a psychological phenomena with like, social media and our access to information and all of that. And, same thing is like Zwift is like being on Highway 36 going north of Boulder, on a Saturday morning. And, it's like there's so many people out on the road and you may be out for a recovery ride and so-and-so, but so-and-so's doing, their hardest effort of the year. And, kind of managing your ego and sticking with your plan and sticking with your program. I think that's the thing, and trusting your program. I think that's the other important thing, which is hard to do sometimes when you're getting inundated with this information. Yeah.
One of the other things that you do, among a lot of things that you do, is you're the high performance director for USA Triathlon. For people who have no idea what that is, what exactly does that job entail?
Right. Yeah. So I work with USAT. I have I think this is about my 3rd year now, and in the high performance department. So I work with all of the athletes that are on the national team, and then some athletes actually that aren't, that are maybe more developing in the world triathlon system. So the draft legal circuit, the Olympics. And I work with both the people that work with USA Triathlon, like in an advisory role, I guess you could say, but I also work with helping take care of the national team's athletes' needs and their coaches' needs. So I work with all the athletes, all the coaches, and some of them, I communicate with like frequently, and some of them, I don't communicate with like as much. It depends totally on the personality, on their coach. Some of the coaches like I communicate with like very frequently, and some of the coaches I don't communicate with, very much at all. And it just kind of depends. But I basically, I work in an advisory role for the high performance department for both the athletes and coaches in that world, but also for the staff that's in that world. So I travel a lot with that. And the last year was a weird year, not very much. The year before that, there's so many times, and I'm this way just with, honestly, I count how many days, I need to count how many days I'm at home because it's way less than days I'm not at home. I can tell you that. And, so I go on most of the WTS circuit. So all of the WTS stops. And then like clearly this year, I'll be in Tokyo at the Olympics with, you know, the athletes that ultimately end up making the team. And I'll go to all the races in the lead up to that. But that circuit, just like, you know, the Ironman circuit, et cetera, is like, it's very COVID right now. And, you know, 1 week a race is on, the next week it's canceled, and we're constantly moving those things around. But there are some concrete races on the schedule, and it looks like we'll get to select the Olympic team as was written and as was meant to be, and hopefully we'll be in Tokyo in July. Yeah.
So you just brought up talking to coaches and then their athletes. Obviously, without like saying specifics, could you tell us about a time when like you were able to like shed some light on a coach and an athlete and like come up with a more positive outcome than what was happening?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, it's hard to share specific details, but I mean, it's always, I love collaborating with other coaches because there are some, you know, in the sport, there's some really amazing coaches to work with. And I love having these relationships with the coaches where they're like bouncing an idea off of me or I'm bouncing an idea off of them, you know, and whether it's has to do with like a specific training, you know, sometimes, hey, you know, what do you think of this set, or what do you think of this week, or what do you think of, you know, our entire yearly plan, you know, or even like travel stuff or acclimatization stuff. Like with Tokyo, for example, we're doing tons of stuff with that, you know, heat acclimatization and time zones and training camps leading up to that, and optimal times at altitude, optimal times at sea level. You know, we do a lot of discussing and planning together. And, you know, a lot of the coaches like use our resources that we have, like at the US, you know, the US Olympic Committee, you know, provides for us through physiologists, et cetera, but also, you know, technology, bike stuff, bike parts. We in November with them, and this was a good collaborative effort with some of the coaches, but a lot of the athletes, like we did wind tunnel testing on many of the national team athletes, which was just a blast, you know, like bringing everyone in and testing equipment and positions and all that stuff with bike fit specialists and, you know, bike technology specialists and everything. And I guess like, yeah, my role with the coaches and the athletes is just coordinating all of that and making sure everyone's on board. They know what we're doing. They know what the game plan is. They know the benefits, you know, all of that stuff. And that COVID was a challenging year because that circuit really got shut down. You know, there were a couple of races. I was in Europe in the middle of the year last year, which was kind of crazy. You know, you couldn't travel. We had to get, you know, special permits from, you know, the German government and everything. I mean, I kind of felt silly being, you know, traveling during COVID to a foreign country just for a triathlon. Like it seemed a little bit, you know, like excessive, but it was neat to be on the circuit and everything. But it was a very different year. So we took advantage of last year and worked on specific initiatives like, say, you know, wind tunnel testing and, you know, that type of stuff last year, and creating programs. Actually, one thing that I'm really proud of that we did with USAT last year was we create a program that's, I feel like helps better identify talent that's up and coming through the ranks that we can then support, so that we have the Paris 2024 champion, the LA 2028 champion, and beyond. Yeah.
That is awesome. I'm sure we're going to have more questions about this. I did want to get one question out of chat, though. Kirby, who was one of our Tucson camp attendees, would like to know what your vision for your coaching business is and how you measure success.
Yeah. What my vision for my coaching business is?
Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting question. Yeah, that's like really, I could go really philosophical there.
Please do.
Yeah. You know, I guess for like my coaching business, like I really, it's funny, Ben Hoffman, when I first started working with Ben Hoffman, and Ben's a very like cerebral guy. And, he was like, what do you want to get out of this? And I was like, what do I want to get out of what? And he was like working with me. And I was like, it was a really good question. I was like, I want to work with you because I think you're a great athlete. I think you have a lot of potential. I think you have, I think you can win Kona. I want to get you there. I want to help you get there. And, but it made me kind of think on the inside, why did I want to work with him? Like what was I going to get out of it and everything? And I think really, and I can transfer this into the coaching business as well, is ultimately, I mean, it's why, a lot of us are coaches. What we want is, there's something incredibly gratifying about using our knowledge and combining that with an athlete's talent and knowledge, and getting the absolute best out of them. And I think that whether that's winning Kona for a pro, you know what I mean, which is the top level of the sport, and and I'm completely honest about this, or so-and-so, some age grouper who was 80 pounds overweight and they wanted to, run a marathon and, in a 18-month period, and you get them to the start line of the marathon and they complete it and they do well and they enjoy it. I think that it's equally as gratifying, because it's those goals are the same for those people, it's a very specific endpoint goal, and getting them there, and they feel just as accomplished as well. And I think as a coach, there's nothing better than that, helping someone get to that point and feeling like you're part of the process. I was doing a talk not too long ago, and the guy asked me, as an athlete, how do you compare being an athlete to a coach? And I said, well, coaching, I get so much more out of coaching, because I feel when an athlete of mine does well, they do well, but also so it's kind of a double victory, because I feel really accomplished and we did something great. They feel really good, so it's kind of double the bonus, you know what I mean? Whereas when I did well, I guess my coach, I felt good for him and everything, but it was it was way more selfish. It was yeah, I won, whereas now I feel there's so much more of a process, and and there's so much more behind it and everything. So I mean, I don't know if that answers that question, but I would say that's kind of my general philosophy, or what I would love to see, or kind of a general vision of the coaching group. But what was the second part of the question, Molly?
How you'll measure your success. How will you know when you get there?
That's a really deep philosophical question. And maybe this is a personality flaw of mine. It's never enough. And all the psychologists can chime in now, but I mean, I remember in 2015 when Caroline Rotich won the Boston Marathon, the first thing that went through my mind, I mean, I'm standing there at the finish line, and I mean, it's an incredibly emotional moment. And because I'd worked with her for 8 years or something at that point. And I was oh, I'm really proud of her, I was just overwhelmed for how much work she had put in. But the second thing that popped into my head was, oh man, how are we going to top this? You know what I mean? It was and I was and then the third thing that pops into my head was gosh, what is wrong with you? Can you not enjoy this moment? You know what I mean? Is this not enough? This is the top of the running world, and she just won, and all of that stuff. But I also think that's what keeps me going, it's you're just never satisfied. And I think it's important, me as a coach, because I think sometimes your athletes can feel that, hey, you won, and you won by 20 minutes. Good job. But you could have won by 25 minutes. Come on, coach. That's not good enough. And I'm well, actually it's not, because if you would have done this better, you probably could have, you know what I mean? So my measurement of a success, I mean, is I guess it's hard, because you always, but it's kind of a catch-22, because I think that's what makes, good athletes and good coaches is, you constantly pushing and, your athletes to, take it to that next level. But the backside of that is, and having that expectation, the backside of that is never being satisfied, even with, top level, results. There's always, oh, well, we can do this 2 times in a row. We can do this 3 times in a row,
They can always be better.
And but I think the athletes can feel that too. And, I think it's a good way to get the best out of them as well. So, yeah.
And you've mentioned in previous interviews that a lot of what you focus on in the coach-athlete relationship is communication. Can you tell us a little bit about how you what sets up a relationship for success? How do you set up the base for that type of communication to be effective?
Yeah, I think a big part of it is obviously getting to know your athlete well. But I'm also a huge believer in, and I mean, this seems like it's like, of course, an of course moment, but like making sure that an athlete is honest with themselves, and then honest with you. And I think it's easy for athletes to kind of get caught up in a world of I don't know if I would call it lying to ourselves, but of, convincing ourselves of like half truths and everything. And for me, it's important that athletes are like super honest with themselves about how everything's going, I'm definitely not like a rah coach, I would say, and be like, you're doing great, good job today. If a person's not doing well, and I think it's because of something that I'm doing wrong or they're doing wrong, like I'll tell them, I'll be like, you're not doing great today. And the reason why is because yesterday you did this and you shouldn't have done that. And you shouldn't have done that. So let's correct that. And, and I deal with athletes sometimes that, they want all, positive stuff all the time and everything. And I think establishing that and like letting people know that, this is the way it works. Like I'm a realist, I want you to be honest with me. I'm going to be honest with you, because I think that especially at the highest level, like I want my athletes when they're on the starting line of the Hawaii Ironman, like I don't want them being like, well, Ryan says that I'm ready to win this race, but I don't know, because he always says that I'm ready, to really do well. And I'm not always ready to do well. Like, I think they're convinced, like, no, Ryan said, I'm ready. I feel like I'm ready, and I'm ready. You know what I mean? Because none of us are lying about, what I'm capable of doing today. And and I think, I think that there's like value in that level of communication, but also just getting to know athletes like really well, and like, spending time with them and understanding what makes them tick, because everyone's so different. And that's the art of coaching. Like that's truly all the physiology stuff. We can all read books and and all of that, and listen to podcasts and stuff like that, but formulating all of that specifically to a specific athlete and their personality and what makes them tick, I think is, and what makes them respond, not just psychologically, but physiologically. And understanding that is really the key. But the only way to get there is that communication point and, understanding them in that way. Yeah. It's not always easy, for sure. Yeah.
Humans.
Yeah, right.
We have another great question from chat. What are some of the things that you're interested in outside of triathlon? If you had a hobby room in your house, what would be in it?
Yeah, a whole bunch of like stuffed animals and a lot of unicorns. Mm-hmm. I'm kidding.
That's what I was gonna guess.
Yeah, that's kind of creepy, right?
No.
Kind of oddly, well, not oddly. I mean, this totally makes sense. I like when I'm not working a lot, like the first thing that I do is I like try to go ride my bike and I try to go swimming, which sounds really boring, but I do love to do that stuff. In the wintertime, I love to ski. So it's maybe not a huge surprise that like my outside of work interests are actually kind of triathlon related. But I mean, I guess like if you want to know, like at 2 a.m. and I can't sleep and I'm surfing on the internet, like type stuff. I love architecture. I love art. I love cars. I love old cars. And so like, if you want to know what like a 1964 Ferrari something is selling for on auction right now, I could probably tell you because I have these weird stats in my head. But those are the types of things. Yeah. Outside of athletics, but honestly, athletics, like, me staying fit, that's what makes me most happy. Yeah.
It's funny, I was talking to Sam, like we were talking about before the other day, and I asked him a similar question. I was like, if not athletics, what would you be doing? And he was like, athletics.
I always say that when I was a pro triathlete, people are like, what are you going to do after you're a pro? And I'm like, I'll probably swim, bike, and run every day. Like, I'm just a caveman. I really don't have much going on between here. I just kind of like to go straight and fast. Yeah.
One of the things that Sam mentioned was that talking about metabolic efficiency was the thing that he is working on a lot this year. And you have a really strong background in that. You have a degree in it. And I was wondering, and as we said beforehand, metabolic efficiency is kind of having a moment over the past 2 or 3 years. People are starting to look at it, try to understand it. What are you trying to achieve with your athletes when you are trying to improve their metabolic efficiency?
Yeah, well, I think kind of like at like a foundational level, like getting fit, gaining fitness is becoming more metabolically efficient, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? The guy who wins Kona is the guy who can go the hardest for the longest on at the highest percentage of his threshold while still utilizing proper like store, like, you know, fat versus sugar stores. You know, that's becoming efficient in that way. Becoming fit is ultimately, it's being able to go really hard for a really long time at a relatively low heart rate where you're metabolizing you know, less sugar, like especially in a long course race. Like, you know, it's impossible to be in sugar metabolism or 100% sugar metabolism, which like above a threshold effort for the whole time. So I guess with my athletes, like part of that, it's built into the periodization of the training in general. I'm a big believer in laying a foundation in, you know, by putting in base miles and aerobic base miles. And that's regardless of what distance you're racing. I mean, I'm old school Arthur Lydiard, you know, physiology stuff is, you know, looking at, you know, I mean, you know, those guys had 800-meter runners, you know, running big volume in the off season and everything. He said, well, it's, you know, it's a 1:45 race. Why would that guy be running 90 miles a week or something? And, you know, Lydiard was a big, and I guess a way that I used to talk about it with my old coach, Joe Friel, is I would always say, your peak is as high as your base is long, you know? So you have this base, then you flip that, and this is your peak, you know, whereas you have this base and you flip that, and this is your peak. So like, I really love to build that foundation, and because that is building those aerobic pathways that are really critical for that type of metabolism. The other thing is periodizing. And this is where I'm not like, I guess when some people, when they talk about metabolic efficiency, they talk a lot about, you know, like they think of like, you know, ketonic diets and, or, you know, going for 8-hour bike rides and, you know, not eating a calorie. And in fact, I have a pro athlete who's been a pro for a while, and I worked with him, you know, multiple years ago. And he was like, yeah, you know, I used to do 8-hour rides without calories. And I was like, that's insane. Like, I don't care what time of the year it is, you know, and everything. I was like, what were the last 4 hours of that 8-hour, you know, ride like? And he was like, oh, I was a zombie and it was horrible. And I was like, yeah, you're probably just you're just beating the shit out of yourself. You're just destroying yourself, not enhancing recovery. But I do believe, and I do like to like practice periodization, both periodization, obviously with training cycles, but also with eating and eating within training. And I think that's like where more of the specificity comes in. And maybe, I'm not sure what you were talking with Sam about, but, you know, in base times of the year, we are eating less, both prior to workouts, but also during workouts. And the reason why is because you can. It's still necessary sometimes, but you can afford to, you know, if you're in an aerobic metabolism, you're not burning that much sugar. We have plenty of fat stores. Even the skinniest of people, you know, have plenty of fat stores. And so you can get away with training that system when you're aerobic. But this is where, like, I'm not like a metabolic, like efficiency, like extremist. Like some people say, oh, then when you add intensity, you know, you continue to restrict calories. And that's not the case. Like, when we start injecting a lot of quality into the workouts, like, I make sure that people are taking race day nutrition, because I want them to get to the sixth hour of a high quality bike ride and still have full energy to do those last intervals at like full effort. And so, like, as we get into more specificity, as we get into more intensity, we start adding calories back into, the cycle. And everyone's different though, too. Using Sam as an example. He's a big guy. I mean, he's like, he's 6'3", 6'4". He weighs 170 pounds, which for a triathlete, I mean, he's lean. Like, if you look at the guy, he's really skinny. But I mean, that's kind of big. But he consumes, like, even during races, he's on the really high end of caloric consumption per hour. But he also has an iron stomach, and so he can handle that. He can actually deal with that. And I think some people run into that, and that's another piece of metabolic efficiency. Is some people, they can't. They need to practice it more because their guts just don't handle like sugars properly or something. But I also feel like if people say, like, if I have a new person coming to me and they say, hey, I've never made it through an Ironman, without my stomach blowing up on me, it's normally because their effort level is not measured well enough in an Ironman. You know what I mean? They're going too far into sugar metabolism too early in the race, making them take in too much sugars, and their stomach not able to process those sugars because they're going too hard, because blood's going to other parts of their body, et cetera. So it ends up, like causing problems. Sorry, my phone's like making noise. But so anyway, like I periodize the eating and the metabolic efficiency component and everything. And by the time we are to race day, it's super important for me, for athletes, to have like nutrition plan dialed. They know exactly how it works, and they're also completely used to it. It's not like, and also I'm definitely not the person who is like, yeah, and we're going to get it through an Ironman on, 50 calories an hour. Like I've never had success with that with athletes. And I can tell you my most successful athletes don't do that. Like, they actually do take in good nutrition, but it's very well planned and it's very well practiced. And I think that's the important thing. You have to really practice it and, dial it in and nail it. So, yeah. And it's a huge part of Ironman racing. I mean, nutrition is everything.
I think these are all very sensible.
Yeah. We're very happy to be hearing all of this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, and I would say in general, like, because this is like a philosophical question that someone could write in, like, I'm really like, I'm very, if you look at most of the great philosophers of the world, they all have quotes about like moderation, basically. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, if you read, Socrates or Nietzsche, like, a lot of them talk about like the importance of moderation. I think as triathletes, like, our personalities, a lot of people, I'm not eating any calories, you know what I mean? Or, or I'm going full on and, doing this, or I'm going to try this extreme thing. And like, I mean, I have a nutrition background, and I feel like I am like sort of like sensible, like with nutrition. Like it's very rare that I see some fad that I'm like, oh yeah, that's the way, you know what I mean? Like, I really think like you just have to think of things, sensibly and analyze stuff that way. And it normally, what makes sense, so yeah.
Looks like we have another good question from chat. That Kirby would like to know if you have noticed any gender or age considerations in periodization. Is it pretty much applicable to everyone, or are there things that change how you would approach the work with an athlete?
No, but I would say less than age. I would say experience. That's a really good question, though. And I'll use an example. If I'm dealing with a 50-year-old who has been doing triathlon since they were 30 years old, and they're very experienced. They've been to Kona 5 times. And this is my first time working with them ever. It does look different, because my assumptions are that they've had years and years and years of foundation work. So they probably need, so when periodizing their schedule, and depending upon what their weaknesses are, but they probably need less foundation work and more like we can actually build into more specific work and work on like limiters and stuff like that a little bit faster, where as opposed to a 50-year-old who comes to me and was like, hey, I used to play soccer in high school, kind of, and and then I played softball, and I drank a lot of beer when I played softball and everything, but now I'm going to do this whole triathlon thing and I want to do an Ironman. I'd be like, listen, 98% of what we're doing between now and that Ironman in a year or whatever is going to be foundation work, is going to be base work and that type of stuff, because that's what they need. They don't have those pathways built up in their body. anything like that. So I would almost like, so it does vary, but it's athlete to athlete. And I would say it's more experience based than age based. And definitely the male female question's a really good question. And I wouldn't, and I mean, I could be wrong with this, but I wouldn't treat men or women differently in that way. I would treat them differently in that they're, like you said, their age and their experience level. Yeah, but not because they're, a man or a woman.
So I'm very curious about, this is a little bit of a subject switch, but I feel like it'll jive well. With the work that you're doing on metabolic efficiency, and even with the work that you're doing overall with athlete development, what are the big indicators for you that that an athlete is fit? Like, what are the priority metrics, I guess?
No, totally. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. With my athletes, like we do, with age group athletes, I do a fair amount of testing, like check-in testing. You know what I mean? Because they want to see that they're getting faster, and they want to see those numbers. And also those numbers are important because they help with, like, say, pacing in races and everything. So, I mean, I track that type of stuff for sure. Power numbers, threshold numbers, heart rate numbers, pace numbers. On the run, I love to look at pace. That's like a big thing and an indicator. It's super easy. It's almost like easy to work with professionals because they have to be hitting a specific pace. It's like, hey, if you want to win this race, we need to get you down to this pace. We're working you down to that. Whereas with age groupers, it's like they maybe want to hit a specific goal, but you have to make sure that that's reality, and getting them to that and working on that. But I mean, looking at those parameters, but the other, like, metric ultimately, like, for me to look at, I mean, there's all of, the numbers, and, you can use performance management charts on Training Peaks, all of that. But once again, is like really just communicating with people and just watching for trends, looking for trends, in the training and everything. And you can feel it if you're close enough with an athlete, you can feel it. And that's why I love, like, our Tucson, like, at the beginning of the conversation, we can talk about, we have a house in Tucson, and I mean, a lot of my pros are there, and I love, this is one of my favorite times of the season because I'm with them on a daily basis, and you can see the changes happening. You can, like, feel it. And, like, I'm on my bike with them, either riding or running or everything, and I'm like, well, I know that last week we did this workout that was somewhat similar, and you were holding this pace, and this week, we're holding this pace. And following those metrics and those parameters, like, really closely, like, you can feel it. Once again, with age groupers, I think the way to know if they're going in the right direction is knowing what their goals are first, and then are we progressing towards that goal, and making sure, obviously, it's a realistic goal. And with pros, it's like, once again, if you want to win this race, like, it's pretty well known, we need to do this, this, and this. And, are you getting in that direction? And that's when, a pro's ready to knock it out of the park, is if they're, like, hitting all of those metrics and it's 2 weeks before the race, and you're like, let's just sit back, and let it happen, yeah, which is really fun. And you can see, and, I guess there's the huge psychological component of that as well, and making people and helping them realize, like, how fit they are. And I often say that, like, actually with one of my pros, we have this conversation every year, and it's usually about right now. And it's like, he's like, yeah, I guess everything's coming along okay. And I was like, you just did this last week. And I'm like, and in a month from now, you're going to look back and you're going to be like, whoa, like, we were really making progress in February, weren't we? And I was like, and then by the time you get to race day and you dominate on race day, you're going to be like, wow, we were really putting in some really solid work. And I'm like, yeah, but remember in February, you're always like, yeah, I don't know, everything's going okay, I guess. And, but it's funny, just like having to remind people of, like, no, look at the progress that you're making. Because when you're in the middle of it, especially as an athlete, sometimes it's hard to see, the forest or the trees type, analogy. So yeah, it's, helping athletes understand, I guess that's the other thing, is the psychological component, that they're trending, in the right direction and everything. And it's fun because, I mean, athletes are emotional. HJ is so much fun because she really, I mean, she'll get fired up, you know what I mean? I'll get like a stream of text, you know, after, did you look at, you know, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's awesome, you know? And it's good to see, because then I know like her energy's up, and like, you know, she's seen that she's trending in the right direction, and, you know, it's awesome. Yeah.
So you come from a single sport background and then come into triathlon, and you also coach a bunch of single sport athletes. What are the different considerations from approaching a single sport athlete, whether it's running alone, cycling alone, swimming alone, or whatever, versus triathlon?
Triathlon is just so much more complicated because you are balancing those three sports, you know? Yeah, I mean, yeah, I grew up a runner and swimmer, really. And even me, my first year of racing like triathlon full time, I had a hard time, like, you know, how do you balance the three of these things? I feel like single sport athletes, it's a lot easier because of there's all you have to balance is that sport and the fatigue of that sport and the recovery of that sport, you know? Whereas in triathlon, you're balancing the fatigue of three sports, you know, so you have to look at both like muscular fatigue, but also like, you know, aerobic or heart fatigue. And, you know, because I mean, your body doesn't know the difference. If you're, you know, getting your heart rate up to 190 every day, you know, your body doesn't know, oh, well, it was cycling yesterday, so it's totally okay today if I get it up to 190 for an hour again. You know, it doesn't know those differences. So, you know, I think balancing that, it's just a way more complicated equation. I mean, even just coaching people, I feel like, especially, you know, with both planning schedules and also analyzing workouts like triathlon, it takes, you know, 4 times the amount of time because of the balance of all those things. So it's really tricky. But I also think one fun thing that I learned from triathlon that helps with single sport stuff is the capacity of athletes, you know, like the amount of work that triathletes can put in is like, I'm always astonished with it, and they still recover and still, you know, and, you know, so single sport athletes, it makes me realize like maybe more of what they're capable of, and then, you know, giving those workloads. So we always joke, like Caroline Rotich is always with us in Tucson, and she always jokes because she'll go for like a long run with HJ or with Ben or with Sam and everything, and she finishes and she's like, oh, I'm totally smashed, you know, and they're like, well, we're gonna go swim now, and she's like, what? You're gonna go what? You know, she goes and takes a nap for the rest of the day. So yeah, single sport athletes, life's easy. Well, I shouldn't say that. Cyclists, that's a fun world. That's hard work. But yeah, runners have it easy.
They have it simple. They still have to run real fast for
real
long.
Do. They still have to, yeah, exactly. Yeah, they still have to run really fast and really long. So yeah.
Well, Ryan, we have like 15 questions that we didn't get to, so we're definitely going to have you back at some point. But it is 9 p.m. where you are, and we usually try to wrap up around 6 p.m. on this side. Before you go, where can people find you? You say you're not spending much time on social media, but where's a good place to locate you?
I do. I have an Instagram account that is it's pretty inactive. People tag me on it, and you can follow me there. It's at Coach Ryan Bolton. Our coaching group has an Instagram account that's very active, which is awesome, which is Bolton Endurance Sports Training, and we're on Facebook as well. I'm on Facebook as well. But yeah, I'm like I need to get with it's the 21st century, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Yeah, I need to like get with it, because I'm really not very active on social media at all. So yeah, I'll comment my athletes' things every once in a while. Yeah.
So you all can drop a letter in the mail to Ryan.
That's right, exactly. Yeah, my mailing address is
Pigeon.
Don't do that. Don't do that. But this is such a treat for us. We've been wanting to have you on for a while, but we wanted to wait until we kind of had our game straight a little bit. So we really, really appreciate it. I know that we had a whole bunch of people watching tonight that'll be really stoked. So we will have this video up in the next few days. Those of you out there, don't forget, come back tomorrow morning for yoga at 7:30, and then join us on Thursday morning to ride bikes in virtual land, and then again on Saturday morning. But Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
I'll join you guys for yoga next time.
Please do.
30,
That would be pretty funny, actually.
That would be
My
amazing.
food pose has something to be desired.
I can't wait.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Thanks so much.